Tonight, I invite you to journey through ancient wisdom that will both relax your mind and nourish your spirit. Make yourself comfortable, let your body sink deeper into your bed, and allow your breathing to find its natural rhythm. As you settle in, I'll share timeless Zen stories that reveal the hidden purpose behind the connections in our lives. Each tale offers a unique perspective on how we grow through our relationships with others. Our first story takes us to a mountain monastery where a young seeker discovers why certain people enter our lives exactly when we need them. The purpose of connections. People never enter our lives by chance. Buddha once said, "Everything that has a beginning has an ending. Make your peace with that, and all will be well." This timeless truth reminds us that all connections in our lives, whether brief encounters or lifelong bonds, have their season and purpose. Tonight's story explores why people enter our lives at precisely the moment they're meant to. Our tale takes us to a peaceful mountainside monastery in ancient Japan, where cherry blossoms dance on gentle spring breezes, and the boundary between earth and sky seems to disappear in the morning mist. Here, among the temple bells and meditation halls, we find wisdom about the invisible threads that connect us all. In this remote monastery lived an elderly monk named Hotaka. Despite being well into his 80s, his eyes still sparkled with the clarity of mountain lakes, reflecting wisdom gathered through decades of meditation and contemplation. Unlike many monks who sought complete solitude, Hotaka believed that our connections with others were essential pathways to understanding the deeper nature of existence. In the web of life, he often told his students, each thread touches countless others. There are no isolated strands. One particularly beautiful spring morning, as pink cherry blossoms swirled around his meditation spot beneath an ancient tree, Hotaka noticed a young man approaching the monastery gates. The visitor moved with determination in his steps but uncertainty in his eyes. Hotaka recognized that particular look, the expression of someone carrying a question too heavy for their heart to bear alone. The young man, named Hiroshi, had traveled 17 days from a coastal village far to the south. Though he had never met Hotaka before, something had drawn him to this particular monastery, to this particular teacher. Later, he would describe it as a feeling like being called by a voice I couldn't quite hear, but somehow understood. It was as though an invisible current had carried him there, much like Buddha taught. Everything arises from causes and conditions. Nothing exists entirely alone. After being welcomed and offered tea to refresh himself after his journey, Hiroshi finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had driven him across mountains and valleys to find this monastery. "Master Hotaka," he began, bowing respectfully, "I've been troubled by something I cannot explain. Throughout my life, I've noticed that sometimes when I meet people, I feel an immediate connection, a sense of recognition, as if I've known them before in some forgotten time. With others, I feel an immediate unease, a shadow crossing my spirit without clear reason." Hiroshi paused, searching for the right words. Do people come into our lives merely by chance? Or is there some invisible pattern I cannot see? Hotaka studied the young man's earnest face, noting how the dappled light filtering through the cherry blossoms created patterns of light and shadow across his features. For several moments, he remained silent, allowing Hiroshi's question to resonate in the space between them, like the lingering sound of a temple bell. People never enter our lives by accident, Hotaka finally replied, his voice carrying the texture of weathered stone, gentle yet unyielding in its certainty. This truth lies deeper than the deepest ocean and reaches higher than the tallest mountain. Each encounter is a thread in an invisible tapestry that began to be woven long before you drew your first breath. The Buddha taught us that, in this world, we are all connected. We have been each other's mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers in countless past lives. This is not merely poetic language, but the actual nature of our existence. Rising slowly, his joints remembering the passage of 84 winters, Hotaka gestured toward the sky, above the monastery garden. Observe the birds, young Hiroshi. They appear to fly freely, charting their own course through the endless blue. Yet each is supported by invisible currents of air that guide and shape their journey. We too are carried by currents invisible to the eye, the flowing rivers of karma, intention, and connection that began long before this life and continue beyond it. Nothing in this world happens without cause. No encounter is without purpose. As Buddha said, nothing ever exists entirely alone. Everything is in relation to everything else. Hiroshi considered this, watching the graceful movement of birds against the spring sky. The concept wasn't entirely new to him. Village elders had spoken of karma and interconnection, but he had never before considered how these invisible laws might be actively shaping the relationships in his life. "But Master," he asked, "if nothing is by chance, then why do some people bring such difficulty into our lives? Why do some connections feel like blessings, while others feel like burdens?" Hotaka smiled gently and motioned for Hiroshi to follow him into the monastery garden. The garden was a carefully tended masterpiece of simplicity, stones arranged with purpose, plants placed with intention, each element in harmonious relationship with all others. Morning dew still clung to leaf and petal, transforming ordinary plants into jeweled wonders in the early light. "Imagine your life as a garden," Hotaka said, gesturing to the space around them. "Every person who crosses your path is like a seed planted by the hand of destiny. Some grow like magnificent trees that provide shade and shelter through many seasons of your life." He pointed to a majestic maple that had clearly witnessed the passing of many generations. "Others," he continued, gesturing to a patch of wildflowers near the garden wall, "bloom brilliantly but briefly, present for just a season before they return to the earth. Yet their beauty changes you, and the garden remembers their presence in the soil itself." Hiroshi nodded, beginning to understand. He thought of the village elder who had guided him through childhood after his father's passing, a sturdy, reliable presence like the maple tree. And he remembered a traveling musician who had stayed in his village for just 3 days, yet whose songs had awakened in Hiroshi a longing for something beyond the boundaries of his small fishing community. They walked in silence for a moment, following a winding stone path that led to a small stream running through the garden. Hiroshi knelt beside the clear water, watching his reflection ripple and transform with the current. The face that looked back at him seemed different somehow, younger yet older, more vulnerable yet stronger. "But what about those who harm us?" he asked quietly, thinking of painful encounters and broken trust he had experienced. "What purpose do they serve in this garden?" Hotaka's eyes reflected a deep compassion born from his own encounters with suffering. "Those who hurt us are often our most profound teachers," he said. "They are like the sharp stones that line this very path beneath our feet." He bent down with surprising agility for his age and picked up a smooth stone from the edge of the stream. When you first step on a sharp stone, you feel only pain. But over time, the passing of countless feet smooths its edges. The stone remains a stone, but its relationship with those who walk the path transforms. Buddha taught, "No one saves us but ourselves. No one can, and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path." The difficult people in our lives, the fisherman who ridiculed your dreams, the friend who betrayed your confidence, the stranger whose words cut like a knife, they each serve to shape your spirit in ways that gentle encounters cannot. They teach you where your path is not, helping you discover where it truly lies. Hiroshi considered this, remembering those who had caused him pain, and how each difficult encounter had ultimately strengthened his resolve or redirected his path in unexpected ways. There was truth in the old monk's words, though it was not an easy truth to embrace. "I have often found," Hotaka continued softly, "that the people who challenge us most are reflecting parts of ourselves we have not yet acknowledged or healed." The Buddha taught that you will not be punished for your anger, you will be punished by your anger. This wisdom reminds us that how we respond to difficult encounters shapes us more than the encounters themselves. The old monk led Hiroshi to a small wooden bench beneath a flowering plum tree, where they sat watching the patterns of light and shadow play across the garden. A few petals drifted down around them like gentle snow. There are fundamentally three types of people who enter the garden of your life, young Hiroshi. Understanding their nature may help you welcome each with appropriate gratitude. Hotaka paused beside a stone lantern, its subtle glow barely visible in the morning light, but still providing guidance along the path. First are those who support the structure of your journey, those who provide foundation, boundaries, and stability. Like the banks of a river, they may constrain you, but in doing so, they give direction to your flow. Then there are those who bring renewal, those who challenge your perceptions, introduce new ideas, or awaken dormant aspects of your spirit. Like spring rain on parched earth, they may disrupt your comfortable patterns, but they awaken new growth. Finally, there are the momentary guides, those who appear briefly at crucial junctures to illuminate a single step in your journey. Like this lantern, they need not remain forever to fulfill their purpose. A single moment of light in darkness may be enough to show the path forward. Hiroshi thought about the people in his life who had filled each of these roles. His mother, steadfast as the mountain itself. The wandering scholar who had taught him to read and opened worlds beyond his village. The old woman at the crossroads who had given him directions to this very monastery with such conviction that he had not doubted his path, even when the way grew difficult. "I begin to understand," Hiroshi said. "But Master, how can I know which connections to nurture and which to release? How do I discern the purpose of each person who enters my life?" Hotaka considered this question carefully before responding. The Buddha offered guidance when he said, "In the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. This wisdom points to the heart of your question. Notice how each connection affects the garden of your spirit. Does this person's presence help beneficial qualities take root and grow? Or do they trample what is tender and beautiful within you? Your own inner wisdom will speak if you learn to listen. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the play of light and shadow across the garden as clouds passed overhead. Hiroshi felt something shifting within him, a new perspective forming, like mist clearing from a valley to reveal the landscape below. "There is one more thing," Hotaka said finally. "Just as others enter your garden with purpose, so too do you enter theirs. In some lives, you are the sturdy tree providing shelter. In others, you are the brief but brilliant bloom that awakens beauty. And in still others, you may be the challenging stone that ultimately smooths to become a step on someone else's path." The Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Your presence in the lives of others can illuminate without diminishing your own light. Remember this, and move mindfully through the gardens you enter. As the day progressed, Hotaka shared more of the Buddha's wisdom about human connection. He spoke of how attachments can become suffering when we cling too tightly to relationships that have served their purpose. He explained the difference between love that liberates and desire that binds. And he taught Hiroshi practices to cultivate gratitude for each encounter, whether pleasant or challenging. When evening approached, casting long shadows across the monastery grounds, Hiroshi prepared to continue his journey. Though he had intended to stay only long enough to ask his question, he now felt reluctant to leave the peaceful presence of the old monk. "I have one final question, Master Hotaka," Hiroshi said, as they stood at the monastery gate. "How can I remember these teachings when I return to the busy world below, where it's so easy to believe that encounters are merely random and relationships are simply what we make of them?" Hotaka smiled and reached into his robe, removing a small pouch. From it, he took 3 small items: a perfectly smooth stone from the stream, a dried cherry blossom, preserved between layers of thin paper, and a tiny carved wooden lantern, no larger than Hiroshi's thumb. "Keep these with you," the monk said, placing them in Hiroshi's palm and gently closing his fingers around them. "When you doubt the purpose in your connections, when you question why someone has entered your life, remember the 3 types of encounter and look for the teaching each brings. And remember the Buddha's words, if you light a lamp for someone else, it will also brighten your path. The connections we nurture illuminate our way forward, even when the path seems dark." With these words, Hotaka bowed to Hiroshi, a gesture of respect from teacher to student, but also an acknowledgement between 2 travelers on the same endless path. Hiroshi returned the bow deeply, feeling a profound gratitude for this encounter that had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. As Hiroshi descended the mountain that evening, the small treasures secure in his pocket, he found himself noticing each person he passed on the road with new awareness. The merchant with his cart of wares, the young mother carrying her child, the old farmer returning from his fields, each no longer seemed like random figures populating his journey, but meaningful threads in the vast tapestry of existence. In the years that followed, Hiroshi would often return to the monastery to visit Hotaka and deepen his understanding of the Buddha's teachings. Eventually, he became a respected teacher in his own right, known especially for his wisdom about human connection and the purpose behind each encounter in our lives. When asked by his own students about the most important teaching he had received, Hiroshi would smile and say, "People do not come into our lives by chance. Each encounter is a seed planted in the garden of your spirit. Some grow into mighty trees, others into beautiful flowers, and still others become the stones that form your path. But none are without purpose, and all contain the potential for awakening." And on his meditation cushion, Hiroshi would still hold the 3 small gifts from Hotaka, now worn smooth with decades of contemplation, and remember the day his own journey of understanding truly began, with a question carried up a mountainside to a monk beneath a cherry tree. As we end this story, I invite you to reflect gently on the connections in your own life. Who have been the sturdy trees providing shelter through your storms? Who have been the brilliant but brief blossoms that transformed your perception? And who have been the challenging stones that ultimately guided your steps toward growth? Buddha taught that every human being is the author of his own health or disease. Similarly, we co-create the meaning in our relationships, finding the lessons each connection offers us. As you drift towards sleep, consider that every person in your life, past, present, and yet to come, arrives with perfect timing, carrying lessons your spirit is ready to receive. May you rest peacefully, held in the web of connection that supports us all, even in our dreams. The wisdom of non-interference when helping hurts. As the gentle light of dawn filters through the branches of ancient cedar trees, we find ourselves approaching a serene valley monastery known for its teachings on mindful action. Take a slow, deep breath as we transition to this new setting. Allow the tension in your shoulders to melt away as you exhale. Feel your body settling more deeply into relaxation. This story explores a paradox that many of us struggle with in our daily lives. Sometimes our well-intentioned efforts to help others can actually cause harm. The Buddha expressed this wisdom beautifully when he said, "If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion." But what does true compassion look like? Is it always rushing in to fix others' problems? Or might there be a deeper wisdom in knowing when to step back? In this peaceful monastery surrounded by flowing streams, lived the respected monk Noro, whose practical wisdom drew seekers from distant provinces. Unlike many spiritual teachers who spoke in riddles, Noro offered guidance that anyone could apply to everyday challenges. Villagers and fellow monks alike sought his counsel when faced with difficult decisions or relationships that had become tangled like fishing nets. One crisp autumn morning, as red maple leaves danced on the breeze outside the meditation hall, a group of Noro's students gathered for his weekly teaching. Among them sat a young monk named Takashi, whose troubled expression caught Noro's attention immediately. "Today," Noro began, his voice gentle yet clear as a mountain stream, "we will explore a teaching that many find difficult to accept. It is the wisdom of non-interference, of knowing when helping others is truly helpful, and when it may cause unexpected harm." Several students exchanged confused glances. Surely helping others was always good. Wasn't that the foundation of their spiritual practice? Noro smiled at their puzzled expressions. Life is like a great river, he continued, and each of us is a small boat navigating its currents. How many of you have tried to steer someone else's boat without being asked? Nearly every hand in the room rose, including Takashi's, though his movement was hesitant. And how many found that their well-intended intervention created unexpected consequences? Again, most hands remained raised. Takashi's face flushed with emotion as he lowered his gaze to the wooden floor. Let me share a story that has been passed down through generations, Noro said, settling more comfortably on his cushion. It concerns two childhood friends, Shun and Masu, who grew up together in a coastal village, much like the one many of you come from. From their earliest days, these two were inseparable, fishing together, celebrating festivals together, sharing both joys and sorrows as they grew into young men. Their bond was so strong that villagers often remarked it was like they shared one heart between two bodies. As adults, their paths diverged somewhat. Shun became a successful merchant with profitable trade routes to distant islands. Masu chose the life of a fisherman, following in his father's footsteps. Though their daily lives differed greatly, their friendship remained strong. One spring, terrible storms damaged many fishing boats and nets in the village. Masu, like many others, found himself in serious financial difficulty. The repairs to his boat would cost more than he could afford, and without it, he could not support his family. Masu was proud, however, too proud to ask for help, even from his closest friend. He began working extra jobs on land, determined to earn the money for repairs through his own efforts, even if it took many months. Shun noticed his friend's struggles and wished to help. What good is my prosperity, he thought, if I cannot share it with those I care about most? But knowing Masu would refuse direct assistance, Shun devised what he believed was a compassionate plan. Without saying anything to Masu, Shun arranged to pay the boat builder in advance for all necessary repairs. He asked the craftsman to tell Masu that an anonymous village patron had created a fund to help all fishermen affected by the storm, and that his repairs would be covered through this fund. When Masu heard this news, his initial relief quickly gave way to suspicion. No such patron or fund had been mentioned in village council meetings. And why would his boat be repaired before others who had suffered greater damage? After asking questions around the village, Masu discovered the truth that his childhood friend had arranged everything behind his back. Though the intention was kind, the deception wounded Masu deeply. Noro paused here, pouring tea into small ceramic cups for his students. The warm aroma of green tea filled the meditation hall as he continued. When Masu confronted Shun about the secret arrangement, their conversation grew heated. I would rather have worked for a year to fix my own boat than have you arrange this deception, Masu said. Do you think so little of me that you believed I couldn't solve my own problems? Shun was stunned. I only wanted to help, he protested. I have more than enough, and you were struggling. But it wasn't your struggle to solve, Masu replied. Some challenges we must face ourselves to discover our own strength. Noro looked directly at Takashi, whose discomfort was now evident to everyone in the room. The Buddha taught us, no one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. This wisdom reminds us that each person must discover their own way forward. What happened to their friendship? One of the younger students asked. It was damaged for many years, Noro replied. Though they eventually reconciled, something had shifted between them. The balanced exchange that had characterized their friendship was disrupted. Masu felt diminished by Shun's actions, even though they came from a place of genuine care. But surely it's better to have a repaired boat than to struggle, another student questioned. Is it? Noro asked gently. Consider what Masu lost in this exchange. He lost the opportunity to overcome a significant challenge through his own efforts. He lost the confidence that would have come from solving his own problem. And perhaps most importantly, he lost trust in the one relationship he had always counted on, to be honest. The Buddha taught that suffering is our greatest teacher. When we rush to remove another's suffering without being asked, we may unintentionally deprive them of important lessons they need to learn. Takashi could remain silent no longer. Master Noro, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I think I have made this mistake recently. Noro nodded encouragingly, inviting him to continue. My younger sister has been struggling to pass her examinations to become a healer, Takashi explained. Without telling her, I spent many evenings rewriting her study materials in simpler language, believing I was helping her. Last week, she discovered what I had done, and instead of being grateful, she was upset. She said I made her feel incapable, like I didn't believe she could succeed on her own. Now I understand her reaction, Takashi continued. I wasn't respecting her journey. I was imposing my solution without being asked. Noro smiled warmly at the young monk's insight. This brings us to the heart of today's teaching. The Buddha instructed his followers to practice karuna, compassionate action. But true compassion requires wisdom about when to act and when to wait. If someone is drowning and calls for help, by all means, extend your hand without hesitation. But if someone is learning to swim and struggling with difficult currents, watching with supportive presence while they find their own strength may be the greater kindness. A soft rain had begun to fall outside, its gentle patter on the temple roof creating a soothing rhythm. The students sat in contemplative silence, absorbing the teaching through this natural meditation. Each person must navigate their own karma, Noro continued after a while. When we interfere without being asked, we disrupt the natural flow of cause and effect that guides each life toward awakening. Even Buddha, with all his wisdom and compassion, offered teachings only to those who sought them. But Master, asked an older student from the back of the room, how do we know when to help and when to step back? The boundary seems unclear. An excellent question, Noro acknowledged. The Buddha offered guidance when he said, before giving, the mind of the giver is happy, while giving, the mind of the giver is made peaceful. After giving, the mind of the giver is uplifted. This teaching points to both our intention and the results of our giving. Before offering help, ask yourself, am I doing this to genuinely support the other person's journey, or to make myself feel useful and important? Will my assistance honor their dignity and autonomy, or subtly diminish them? Have they indicated in some way that my help would be welcome? And perhaps most importantly, is this actually mine to solve? Many times what appears as helping is actually interfering with lessons that person needs to learn themselves. Noro reached for a nearby walking stick and drew a simple circle in the sand garden beside his cushion. Think of each life as having a boundary, like this circle. Inside the circle are the experiences, challenges, and growth that belong to that person alone. True compassion respects these boundaries. Sometimes the most compassionate action is simply to be present with someone in their difficulty, not trying to fix or change their experience, but offering the gift of your attentive care while they find their own way through. Another student raised her hand. "Master, I understand the wisdom of not interfering, but doesn't this contradict our practice of generosity? Aren't we supposed to give freely to those in need?" "Ah," Noro smiled. "Another excellent question." The Buddha spoke of dana, the practice of generous giving, as essential to the spiritual path. But true generosity comes without strings or expectations. It does not diminish the receiver or elevate the giver. Consider the difference between these approaches. One person says, "I notice you're struggling. How can I support you?" While another says, "I see your problem. Let me fix it for you." The first honors the other's wisdom and agency. The second subtly suggests they are incapable. The rain had stopped now, and sunlight began to filter through the paper windows of the meditation hall. Noro rose slowly and walked to the doorway, inviting his students to follow him outside. In the monastery garden, droplets of rain still clung to leaves and flower petals, transforming the ordinary landscape into a world of tiny jewels. Noro pointed to a spiderweb stretched between two branches, each strand now visible due to the rain clinging to its delicate structure. "Nature offers us perfect examples of non-interference," he said. "See how the spider builds its web, but doesn't control which insects fly into it. The web exists as an offering. The results come in their own time." When we offer our help in this spirit, creating supportive conditions without attachment to outcomes, we practice the highest form of compassion. We honor each person's right to their own journey, with all its necessary struggles and discoveries. Takashi approached Noro as the other students began to disperse. "Master, I will visit my sister tomorrow and apologize for interfering with her studies. I see now that my actions, though well-intended, came from not fully trusting her capability." "A wise recognition," Noro said, placing a gentle hand on the young monk's shoulder. "And perhaps instead of offering solutions, you might simply ask what kind of support would be most helpful to her right now. The answer may surprise you." As evening approached, casting long shadows across the monastery grounds, Noro gathered with a smaller group of senior students beneath a gnarled pine tree that had weathered countless storms over centuries. "There is a final teaching I wish to share about non-interference," he said as they settled around him. The Buddha said, "The root of suffering is attachment." This applies not only to our possessions and desires, but also to our ideas about how others should live or how situations should unfold. When we become attached to our vision of how to solve another's problem, we create suffering for both them and ourselves. We must learn to offer our wisdom lightly, like an open palm holding water, available to drink but not forced upon anyone. An old farmer who occasionally visited the monastery for teachings spoke up. "Master Noro, I have been thinking about my son as you speak. For years, I have tried to make him follow in my footsteps and take over our family farm. But his heart lies elsewhere. He dreams of becoming a carpenter. I see now that I have been trying to steer his boat without being asked." Noro nodded thoughtfully. The Buddha taught, let go of the past, let go of the future, let go of the present, and cross over to the farther shore of existence. Sometimes the greatest act of love is releasing our grip on how we believe others should live. "But," the farmer continued, "if I don't guide him, how will he know the right path?" "Perhaps the right path for him is not the same as it was for you," Noro suggested gently. Buddha reminded us that each morning we are born again. What we do today matters most. Your son must discover his own way of contributing to the world, his own form of right livelihood. The farmer fell silent, contemplating this new perspective. Around the circle, others began sharing their own experiences, times when well-meaning help had caused harm, or when stepping back had allowed someone to find unexpected strength. As the stars began to emerge in the evening sky, a young woman who lived in the village below the monastery spoke of her elderly mother. She has become forgetful and sometimes struggles with daily tasks. I have been taking over more and more of her responsibilities, thinking I was helping. But recently, I've noticed she seems sadder, less engaged with life. Perhaps, Noro suggested, there are ways to support her that preserve her dignity and sense of purpose. Instead of doing things for her, could you find ways to do things with her? Or modify tasks so she can still participate in meaningful ways? The woman's eyes widened with recognition. Yes, I see now. I've been helping in a way that makes her feel useless, when I could be helping in a way that honors what she can still contribute. The Buddha taught that health is the greatest gift, contentment is the greatest wealth. True help maintains both the physical well-being and the inner wealth of contentment that comes from feeling capable and valued. As the gathering concluded, Noro shared one final story that had been passed down through generations of Buddhist teachers. Long ago, a man noticed a butterfly struggling to emerge from its chrysalis. The butterfly was working very hard, and the man felt compassion for its struggle. Wanting to help, he gently used a small knife to widen the opening of the chrysalis, making it easier for the butterfly to emerge. The butterfly came out quickly with a swollen body and small, shriveled wings. The man expected that at any moment, the wings would expand to support the butterfly's body. But that never happened. What the man didn't understand was that the butterfly needed the struggle of pushing through the tight chrysalis to force fluid from its body into its wings. Without that struggle, the butterfly could never fly. His help left the butterfly grounded for life. This is perhaps the clearest illustration of our teaching today, Noro concluded. Sometimes the very struggle we wish to remove for another person is precisely what they need to develop their strength. Our compassionate restraint, allowing others to face their necessary challenges, can be the greatest gift we offer. As darkness fell completely over the monastery, the gathering dispersed with much to contemplate. The simple teaching had revealed itself to be profoundly relevant to countless situations in their daily lives. Takashi remained behind, helping Noro extinguish the lanterns around the meditation hall. "Master," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about my sister again. If I hadn't interfered with her studies, she might have developed her own methods for understanding the difficult material, methods that would have served her better than mine." "Yes," Noro agreed. "And there's something else to consider. By struggling with the material herself, she would gain not just knowledge, but confidence in her ability to overcome challenges. That confidence might serve her even more than the information itself when she faces difficult cases as a healer." "I see that now," Takashi nodded. "The Buddha's words about being our own refuge make more sense to me. We must each discover our own inner strength." "Exactly so," Noro smiled. "The Buddha taught, just as a solid rock is not shaken by the storm, even so the wise are not affected by praise or blame. When we solve our own problems, we develop that unshakable inner foundation. As you drift deeper towards sleep, consider this ancient wisdom in your own life. Are there situations where your desire to help might actually be depriving someone of an important growth experience? Could stepping back while remaining supportively present be the greater gift in some relationships? The Buddha's teaching that all beings are the owners of their karma reminds us that each person must be allowed to navigate their own journey with all its necessary lessons. True compassion honors this reality rather than trying to circumvent it. May you rest peacefully tonight, holding this wisdom of knowing when to act and when to simply be present. May your relationships be characterized by respect for each person's unique path. And may you find the perfect balance between offering support and honoring others' need to grow through their own efforts. Recognizing harmful people, protecting your inner peace. As our journey continues, the peaceful glow of evening lanterns guides us to a remote mountain temple, where the air is crisp and the distant sound of rushing water creates a natural melody for meditation. Let your body settle more deeply into comfort as we explore tonight's wisdom. Feel each breath becoming slower and more rhythmic. There comes a time in everyone's life when we must learn to recognize those who may wish to harm us, not to foster suspicion or fear, but to protect our inner peace and create healthy boundaries. This ancient wisdom remains profoundly relevant in our modern world, where relationships are complex and not always what they seem. The Buddha taught, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." This simple teaching reminds us that caring for ourselves, including protecting ourselves from harmful influences, is not selfish, but necessary. High on a misty mountain plateau, surrounded by ancient pines and flowering plum trees, stood a secluded temple known for its teachings on discernment and inner protection. Here lived the elderly and respected monk Hogi, whose clear perception of human nature drew many seekers facing difficult relationships or confusing situations. One spring morning, as cherry blossoms swirled through the temple courtyard, a young woman named Shara arrived, her face reflecting both determination and distress. She had traveled for 7 days from her coastal village, seeking wisdom about a persistent problem. After being welcomed and offered tea to refresh herself after the journey, Shara was invited to speak with Master Hogi in the temple garden. The old monk's kind eyes seemed to see through superficial concerns to the deeper questions beneath. "Master Hogi," Shara began, bowing respectfully, "I've heard that you understand how to recognize people who bring harm rather than good into our lives. Please teach me this wisdom. I find myself repeatedly drawn into relationships that leave me feeling drained and diminished, yet I don't see the warning signs until great damage has been done." Hogi studied the young woman's earnest face for a moment before responding. "Before we discuss recognizing harmful people," he said gently, "I must make an important distinction. The people we might call toxic or harmful are not necessarily monsters or evil beings. They are often wounded individuals whose own pain spills onto others. This understanding doesn't mean we should endure their harmful behavior," he continued. "Rather, it allows us to respond with wisdom and compassion for them and ourselves as we create necessary boundaries." Shara nodded, absorbing this perspective. It aligned with her own intuition that many who had caused her pain weren't intentionally cruel, but rather acting from their own unhealed wounds. "Before determining someone is truly harmful to your well-being," Hogi advised, "ask yourself, why does this person behave this way? Is there something in their past or present circumstances that might explain, though not excuse, their actions? And most importantly, is there anything I might do to prevent their behavior from continuing to affect me negatively?" Only after honest reflection on these questions should you consider whether maintaining distance is the wisest choice for preserving your peace. The master invited Shara to walk with him through the temple gardens, where early spring flowers were beginning to bloom alongside carefully tended paths. The natural beauty created a perfect setting for absorbing difficult truths with a peaceful heart. "Now," Hogi said, "let me share the signs that can help you recognize when someone might be harmful to your well-being. The Buddha taught us to be lamps unto ourselves, learning to trust our own discernment rather than blindly following others. These signs will help illuminate what you likely already sense, but perhaps have been taught to ignore. The first sign to watch for is constant manipulation," he began. "Imagine someone who subtly distorts reality to achieve their goals, making you question your own perceptions and memories." Hogi stooped to point out a vine that had wrapped itself around a young tree, slowly constricting its growth. Like this vine, manipulation is often gradual and difficult to notice until significant damage has occurred. The manipulator might use lies, selective truth-telling, or emotional pressure to control you. For example, he continued, consider a colleague who tells you that others speak poorly of your work and suggests you decline an opportunity, supposedly for your own good. Later, you discover they wanted the opportunity for themselves. Their seeming concern masked their true motive of removing you as competition. Shara's eyes widened with recognition. I worked with someone exactly like that, she said quietly. I always felt confused after our conversations, questioning decisions I'd previously been certain about. Hogi nodded. The Buddha taught, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Trust your confusion as a signal. When someone's words or actions consistently leave you feeling disoriented, your inner wisdom is trying to alert you to a discrepancy between what appears to be and what truly is. They walked on, following a stream that wound through the garden. The water flowed smoothly in some places and tumbled over rocks in others, yet always continued its journey forward. The second sign, Hogi continued, is a lack of genuine empathy. While many people might seem caring on the surface, those who are truly harmful often reveal a fundamental inability to care about others' feelings or experiences. This doesn't mean they never show concern, he clarified. Rather, their concern appears selectively, usually when they need something from you or when others are watching. When you're suffering and there's nothing to be gained by supporting you, their true nature becomes apparent through their indifference. Shara thought of a friend who had seemed deeply interested in her life during social gatherings but was consistently unavailable when she faced genuine difficulties. The pattern had been there all along, but she had made excuses for it rather than accepting what it revealed. The Buddha said, "There is no fear for one whose mind is not filled with desires." Those who lack empathy often view relationships primarily as transactions. What can this person do for me? When you cease to be useful for their desires, their seeming care evaporates. They paused by a stone lantern, marking a fork in the garden path. Hogi chose the route that led higher up the mountainside, where they could look out over the valley below. The physical ascent mirrored the raising of awareness that was occurring through their conversation. The third sign to be mindful of, the monk continued, is someone who habitually creates conflict. Even in situations where harmony prevails, this person seems to thrive on tension and disagreement. They may spread rumors, create misunderstandings between friends, or constantly find fault where none exists. Why would anyone want to create conflict? Shara asked, genuinely puzzled. Some people feel more secure in chaotic environments because they grew up in them, Hogi explained. Others use conflict to manipulate outcomes or distract from their own behavior. And some, sadly, enjoy the power they feel when disrupting others' peace. The Buddha taught that hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This wisdom doesn't mean we should continue exposing ourselves to those who sow discord. Rather, it guides us to respond without adding our own hatred to the situation as we create appropriate distance. They reached a stone bench overlooking a spectacular view of the valley. Below them, the world seemed to unfold like a living map, villages nestled among rice fields, rivers threading their way through forests, and in the far distance, the shimmer of the ocean. This broader perspective offered a perfect metaphor for the wisdom Hogi was sharing. The fourth sign, he said as they sat together, is an excessive need for control. Some people cannot allow others to make their own choices or live according to their own values. They may criticize your decisions, offer constant, unsolicited advice, or even actively interfere with your plans. I recognize this one clearly, Shara admitted. My former partner couldn't accept when I made decisions independently. He would question everything from how I dressed to which friends I spent time with, always suggesting his way was better. Yes, Hogi nodded, and such control often begins subtly, presented as care or concern, before gradually increasing until your autonomy has been seriously compromised. The Buddha taught, "No one saves us, but ourselves. No one can, and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. Those who truly care for us respect our right to navigate our own journey, even when they might choose differently. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and distant flowers as they sat in comfortable silence for a few moments. Shara was processing how these insights applied to relationships in her life, both past and present. The clarity was both painful and liberating. The fifth sign, Hogi continued, is chronic dishonesty. While everyone occasionally fails to be entirely truthful, harmful people often maintain elaborate webs of deceit. They may lie even when the truth would serve them better, simply because deception has become their default way of relating to others. How can we determine if someone is chronically dishonest? Shara asked. Lies can be difficult to detect, especially from someone skilled at deception. Trust your instincts, Hogi advised. When stories don't quite align or explanations seem unnecessarily complex, your intuition often recognizes the discrepancy before your conscious mind can articulate it. The Buddha encouraged his followers to question everything, even his own teachings, and to verify truth through their own experience rather than accepting claims on authority alone. Also, he added with gentle humor, those who are dishonest typically can't maintain consistency over time. As another Buddhist teaching states, three things cannot long be hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. They began walking again, following a path that wound through a bamboo grove where shafts of sunlight created patterns of light and shadow on the ground. The straight, strong bamboo stems served as a reminder of integrity, of living in alignment with one's true nature. The sixth sign to be mindful of, Hogi continued, is someone who consistently violates boundaries. After you've clearly expressed a limit or preference, they repeatedly disregard it, perhaps dismissing your concerns as unimportant or accusing you of being too sensitive. This disrespect for boundaries can manifest in small ways, like interrupting when you speak or borrowing things without asking. Or it may appear in more significant violations, such as sharing personal information you've asked them to keep private. In either case, the pattern reveals a fundamental lack of respect for your autonomy. Shara nodded, remembering how her boundaries had often been treated as unreasonable restrictions rather than legitimate needs. I see now that respecting boundaries is about basic respect for another person, she reflected. Precisely, Hogi affirmed. The Buddha taught the principle of ahimsa, non-harm, as a foundation for all relationships. Honoring another's boundaries is a fundamental expression of this principle. As they emerged from the bamboo grove, they entered a garden of medicinal plants, each carefully tended for its healing properties. Master Hogi paused to touch a particular herb, rubbing its leaves to release a pungent aroma. The seventh sign, he said, is perhaps the most revealing. Pay attention to how you feel in someone's presence. Do you consistently feel diminished, anxious, or exhausted after interacting with them? Or do you feel energized, affirmed, and more fully yourself? Our bodies often recognize harmful dynamics before our minds can articulate what's wrong. The Buddha taught mindfulness of sensations as a primary path to wisdom. Your physical and emotional responses offer important information about whether a relationship supports your well-being or undermines it. Shara closed her eyes for a moment, scanning her body's responses as she thought about different people in her life. The contrast was striking. Some brought a sense of lightness and expansion, while others created immediate tension in her shoulders and a heaviness in her chest. She had been receiving these signals all along, but hadn't recognized their significance. "The final sign I'll share with you today," Hogi said, as they completed their circuit of the garden and returned to the temple entrance, "is an absence of reciprocity. Healthy relationships involve a natural flow of giving and receiving over time. While perfect balance isn't necessary or even possible, there should be a general sense of mutual care and contribution. Those who consistently take without giving, whether material resources, emotional support, or simple consideration, reveal a fundamental self-centeredness that makes genuine connection impossible. The Buddha taught that generosity creates merit and happiness for both giver and receiver. When someone shows no interest in experiencing the joy of giving, only of receiving, they miss half the blessing of relationship. They settled on cushions in a small meditation pavilion, where the late afternoon sun created a golden glow. Shara's face showed both recognition and concern as she integrated these teachings. "Master Hogi," she asked, "now that I can better recognize harmful people, what should I do when I encounter them? Sometimes complete separation isn't possible, like with family members or colleagues." The old monk nodded, acknowledging the practical reality of her question. The Buddha offered guidance here too, teaching the middle way between harmful extremes. Neither complete entanglement nor absolute rejection is usually necessary. Instead, we can practice what I call compassionate distance. First, he explained, establish clear internal boundaries about what behaviors you will and won't accept. Then communicate these calmly and directly when needed, without accusation or blame. For example, "I'm not comfortable discussing this topic," rather than, "You always try to make me talk about things that upset me." Second, limit exposure to what you can manage without compromising your well-being. This might mean shorter visits, specific settings for interaction, or having supportive people present. Third, practice emotional detachment, not in the sense of becoming cold or uncaring, but in recognizing that others' harmful behavior reflects their condition, not your worth. As the Buddha taught, you will not be punished for your anger, you will be punished by your anger. The same applies to all difficult emotions that arise in challenging relationships. And finally, Hogi concluded, cultivate compassion, both for yourself and for those who cause harm. Their behavior often stems from their own suffering, though this understanding never obligates you to endure mistreatment. Shara sat quietly, absorbing these teachings. After some time, she spoke again. "I've noticed something as we've talked today. Many of these harmful patterns seem connected to each other. Manipulation often involves dishonesty, control frequently violations, boundaries, and so on." "Excellent observation," Hogi smiled. "Yes, these traits often cluster together, reinforcing each other. Recognizing one can help you become alert to the possible presence of others." "There's something else I'm wondering," Shara continued. "How do I ensure I'm not exhibiting these harmful behaviors myself? I want to be certain I'm bringing health rather than harm to my relationships." The old monk's eyes crinkled with appreciation for this thoughtful question. The very fact that you ask shows awareness that points toward health rather than harm. Those who cause persistent damage rarely question their own behavior. Nevertheless, self-examination is a worthy practice for us all. The Buddha encouraged his followers to reflect regularly on their actions of body, speech, and mind, asking, do these actions lead to my own harm, to others' harm, or to both? Are these actions unwholesome, with painful consequences? If the answer is yes, such actions should be recognized and abandoned. If the answer is no, one can continue with joy, training in such actions day and night. As evening approached, painting the mountain in shades of gold and purple, Shara prepared to return to the guest quarters, where she would spend the night before beginning her journey home. She bowed deeply to Master Hogi, expressing gratitude for teachings that had illuminated patterns she had sensed but couldn't previously articulate. One final guidance Hogi offered as they parted. The Buddha taught, to understand everything is to forgive everything. As you recognize harmful patterns and create appropriate boundaries, try to maintain compassion rather than judgment. Most people who harm others were themselves harmed, though this understanding never obligates you to endure mistreatment. Remember too that people can change. The boundaries you create might actually help someone recognize their own harmful patterns and begin the journey toward healing. Whether they change or not, your compassionate distance creates space for your own peace and growth. In the months and years that followed, Shara applied these teachings in her daily life. She became known in her village for both her clear boundaries and her compassionate heart. Young people sought her advice about relationships, and she shared Master Hogi's wisdom, adapted to their specific situations. Occasionally, she returned to the mountain temple to deepen her understanding. During one visit, she shared with Hogi how learning to recognize harmful dynamics had transformed not only her relationships with others, but also her relationship with herself. She had discovered that the same patterns of manipulation, control, and boundary violation could exist in her internal dialogue. Indeed, the old monk smiled. The Buddha taught that we must be our own refuge, finding within ourselves the wisdom and compassion we seek in others. As you continue to recognize and release harmful patterns, both external and internal, you create more space for genuine peace to flourish. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you too can reflect on the relationships in your life with these ancient insights. Notice which connections leave you feeling energized and which leave you drained. Consider whether clear, compassionate boundaries might help transform certain relationships into healthier forms of connection. The Buddha taught, you can search throughout the entire universe for someone who is more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Let this wisdom guide you as you navigate your relationships, choosing connections that honor your worth and contribute to your peace. The richness of true connection, finding peace with few friends. As the night deepens around us, we journey to a different kind of sanctuary, a small mountain hermitage perched on a cliff overlooking a vast, moonlit valley. Allow yourself to settle even more deeply into comfort as we explore tonight's wisdom. With each breath, feel your body becoming heavier, your mind growing quieter. In a world that often measures success by the quantity of our connections, followers, friends, professional networks, there is profound Buddhist wisdom about finding deeper fulfillment through fewer, more meaningful relationships. Tonight's story explores why having just a few true friends might be not just sufficient, but actually preferable for genuine happiness and inner peace. The Buddha taught, "A true friend is one who stands by you in your hour of need." This simple teaching points to quality over quantity, to the transformative power of even a single authentic connection in our lives. High on a remote mountainside, accessible only by a narrow path that wound through cedar forests and rocky outcroppings, lived the monk Kobo. Unlike many spiritual teachers who gathered large followings, Kobo preferred solitude and simplicity, meeting with just a few dedicated students and occasionally receiving travelers seeking specific guidance. His small hermitage consisted of a meditation hall, a modest kitchen, and a few sleeping quarters for visitors. Though simple in its design, the space radiated a profound sense of peace that visitors often remarked upon. Something about the atmosphere invited deep reflection and honest conversation. One autumn day, as crimson and gold leaves danced on mountain breezes, a young woman named Alina arrived at the hermitage. She had traveled from a bustling coastal city, seeking wisdom about a problem that troubled her deeply. After being welcomed with tea and a simple meal, Alina was invited to speak with Kobo in the hermitage garden. Unlike the carefully manicured gardens of larger temples, this space had a wild beauty, native plants growing in natural patterns, stone pathways that followed the contours of the land, and stunning views of the valley below. "Master Kobo," Alina began, her voice betraying her uncertainty, "I've come because something feels wrong with my life, but I cannot pinpoint what it is. I have a good position as a merchant's assistant, enough money for my needs, and reasonable health. Yet I feel a persistent loneliness that nothing seems to ease." "Tell me more about this loneliness," Kobo invited, his weathered face kind but unreadable. "Well," Alina continued, "when I look around, everyone else seems to have many friends. Their days are filled with social gatherings, their festivals spent with large groups. I have only 2 close friends, and sometimes weeks pass when I see no one outside my workplace. Is there something wrong with me that I cannot attract and maintain more friendships?" Kobo considered her words carefully before responding. His teaching style was never rushed. He believed wisdom emerged in the spaces between words as much as in the words themselves. "Alina," he finally said, "friendship is indeed a precious gift. But your happiness shouldn't be measured by how many friends you have. I would like to share with you why having few friends, or even none at all, is not something to worry about and may actually be an advantage." He gestured for her to follow him to a stone bench overlooking the valley. As they sat down, the vast panorama before them, mountains, forests, the distant shimmer of a river, created a perfect backdrop for contemplating life's broader perspective. "First," Kobo began, "consider that relationships and human bonds should be measured in terms of quality rather than quantity. The Buddha taught, If you find a wise critic to point out your faults, follow him as you would a guide to hidden treasure. This suggests that a single friend who helps us see ourselves clearly is worth more than many who simply echo what we want to hear. Kobo reached for a small teapot that had been warming near a stone lantern. He poured a single cup and offered it to Alina. "Notice this teacup," he said. "It doesn't try to hold all the tea in the world, just enough for this moment, this connection. Would you rather have 100 shallow pools that dry up in summer heat, or one deep well that provides cool water, even in drought?" Alina looked thoughtfully at the cup in her hands, considering the metaphor. "I have always assumed more was better," she admitted. "But you're suggesting that depth might be more valuable than breadth when it comes to relationships." "Exactly," Kobo nodded. "Having fewer friends guarantees a certain degree of freedom and authenticity. You can be yourself without restriction or external influence. Many people exhaust themselves trying to maintain a social image across numerous relationships, always appearing happy, successful, and agreeable, even when they don't feel that way. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Similarly, better than 1,000 hollow connections is one relationship where you can be fully yourself, speaking truth without fear of judgment or rejection. Alina reflected on her two close friendships, with her childhood neighbor May and her cousin Jiro. With them, she never felt the need to pretend or impress. Their conversations flowed easily, moving between light-hearted banter and profound questions about life. The contrast with her more surface-level work relationships was striking. Having fewer friends allows you to focus your emotional energy on relationships that truly matter, Kobo continued. Think about how many conflicts or tensions usually occur in large groups. Each relationship requires maintenance, understanding, and occasional repair. With fewer connections, you can invest more deeply in each one, creating bonds that can withstand life's inevitable challenges. He gestured toward two ancient pine trees growing near the cliff edge, their roots visibly intertwined, their branches offering mutual support against the mountain winds. "Those trees have grown together for over 100 years, he said. "Their connection runs deep, far below what we can see. That depth gives them stability that a forest of saplings with shallow roots could never provide." Kobo paused, allowing Alina time to absorb this perspective. The sound of wind through the valley created a gentle background melody to their conversation. "Another benefit," he continued after a while, "is that having fewer social obligations creates space for solitude, something essential for self-discovery and spiritual growth." The Buddha himself left his community for extended periods of solitary meditation. It was in these quiet moments, not in constant social engagement, that he found enlightenment. In the tranquility of your solitude, you can discover hidden passions, latent interests, or unexplored talents. You are not limited by others' expectations or opinions. This allows you to grow in surprising ways that might never emerge in a life filled with constant social activity. Alina thought about her private joy in calligraphy, hours spent practicing the perfect brushstroke, losing herself in the flow of ink across paper. She had never shared this passion with anyone but May and Jiro. The solitary practice brought her a satisfaction unlike anything else in her life. "I do treasure my quiet evenings," she admitted. "Yet I still feel something is wrong with me for not having more friends, like everyone else seems to." "Ah," Kobo smiled gently, "but what is everyone else really experiencing?" The Buddha cautioned against comparing ourselves to others, noting that we see only their external circumstances, not their internal reality. Many people with numerous social connections still feel profoundly lonely because those relationships lack depth and authenticity. They perform themselves rather than being themselves. The laughter you hear at crowded festivals often masks inner emptiness that quieter souls like yourself might actually be addressing more honestly. The sun was beginning to set now, painting the valley in shades of amber and purple. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. Kobo and Alina sat in comfortable silence for a time, watching the transformation of light across the landscape. "Having fewer close ties allows for greater freedom in life choices," Kobo said after a while. "Imagine receiving an opportunity to study with a master calligrapher in a distant province. With few attachments, you could follow this calling without the complicated web of obligations that might otherwise hold you back." The Buddha taught that attachment is a primary source of suffering. This doesn't mean we should avoid meaningful connections, but rather that we should hold them lightly, allowing both ourselves and others the freedom to follow our true paths. Alina nodded, remembering how her friend May had recently moved to pursue her dream of becoming a healer. Though Alina missed her daily presence, their friendship had easily accommodated the change. They now exchanged letters full of deeper reflections than their previous casual conversations had contained. The distance had, paradoxically, created a new dimension of intimacy. "There's something else to consider," Kobo added. "People who are content with fewer friends often possess certain admirable qualities. They tend to be more self-sufficient, thoughtful, and authentic. They don't settle for superficial connections, but wait patiently for relationships that truly resonate with their values and interests." The Buddha praised qualities like discernment and mindfulness, the ability to make wise choices about where we invest our energy. By being selective about your relationships, you're actually practicing these spiritual virtues. As darkness began to enfold the mountains, Kobo lit a small lantern that cast a warm glow over their conversation. The stars appeared one by one in the vast sky above them, countless yet distinct, each with its own particular light. "Consider your two close friends," Kobo suggested. "What qualities make these relationships meaningful to you? What needs do they fulfill that a dozen casual acquaintances could not?" Alina reflected thoughtfully. "With May and Jiro, I never have to pretend. They know my flaws and love me anyway. We can share silence as comfortably as conversation. And they challenge me to grow rather than just making me feel good about myself as I am. Those are the markers of true friendship," Kobo affirmed. The Buddha described a true friend as one who stands by you in your hour of need. He didn't measure friendship by frequency of contact or shared activities, but by depth of commitment and mutual growth. In Western traditions, Aristotle spoke of 3 types of friendship: those based on utility, those based on pleasure, and those based on virtue. Only the last type, where friends help each other become better people, brings lasting fulfillment. These relationships are naturally rare because they require both parties to value truth over comfort. Alina found herself thinking about her workplace acquaintances. Most of those relationships were indeed based on utility, mutual assistance with tasks, shared information about opportunities, social connections that might prove advantageous. They served their purpose but left her feeling strangely empty. "I think I understand," she said slowly. "But how do I stop feeling that something is wrong with me when I see others with their large social circles? The feeling of being somehow deficient persists, even as your wisdom makes sense to my mind." Kobo nodded, acknowledging the challenge of aligning intellectual understanding with emotional experience. The Buddha taught a practice called mudita, sympathetic joy in others' happiness. When you see someone enjoying their large social circle, can you feel happiness for their path while simultaneously honoring that yours may be different? Also consider that what you're seeing may be quite different from reality. Many people maintain extensive social networks out of fear of being alone rather than genuine connection. They may appear happy in groups while privately feeling unknown and unseen. The Buddha warned against making assumptions based on appearances. He said, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, or because it is spoken and rumored by many." This applies to social norms as much as to philosophical ideas. The assumption that more friends equals greater happiness is exactly the kind of unexamined belief he cautioned against. A night bird called from the darkness beyond the lantern's glow, its voice plaintive yet beautiful. The sound reminded Alina of her own feelings, a mixture of melancholy and something more nuanced that might actually be a form of contentment she hadn't recognized. "I have known people," Kobo said quietly, "who claim to have no friends, only to discover that in their life there was actually one person, just one, who counted as a true friend by the Buddha's definition. And this single, authentic connection provided more sustenance for their spirit than dozens of superficial relationships could have offered." People who tend to have few deep friendships often possess an extraordinary inner world. They are the poets, philosophers, and innovators who shape culture through their depth of thought and feeling. This inner richness is not a flaw, but a rare gift, one the Buddha himself exemplified in his teachings. As the night grew cooler, they moved inside to the meditation hall, where a small fire provided warmth. Several other residents and visitors were engaged in evening meditation or quiet conversation. The atmosphere was one of peaceful coexistence, without pressure for interaction, each person free to engage or remain in contemplative silence according to their needs. "Notice this community," Kobo said softly. "We are few in number but deep in connection. Some here speak daily, others may go weeks with only a nod of acknowledgement. Yet all feel held within something larger than individual friendship. This too is a valid form of human connection, being alone together, each respected in their uniqueness." Alina observed the quiet harmony of the space. It reminded her of evenings in her own small home, the freedom to follow her interests without explanation or interruption, yet with the comfort of knowing May or Jiro might visit if she desired company. Perhaps what she had interpreted as loneliness was actually a spaciousness that allowed her spirit room to breathe. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without," Kobo reminded her. This teaching applies to your question about friendship. The sense of connection you seek cannot be found merely by accumulating more relationships. It emerges from your capacity to be fully present in the connections you already have, including your relationship with yourself. Try this practice, he suggested. Each day, bring full awareness to your interactions with others, whether you're dear friends or casual acquaintances. Notice when you feel truly seen and when you feel you're performing a social role. This mindfulness will help you distinguish between connections that nourish your spirit and those that deplete it. Alina stayed at the hermitage for 3 days, participating in its simple rhythms of meditation, work, and community meals. She observed how the residents moved between solitude and connection with natural ease, neither clinging to company nor avoiding it. Their interactions had a quality of presence she rarely experienced in the city. On her final evening, she joined Kobo for tea in the garden once more. The moon was full now, illuminating the valley with silver light that transformed the familiar daytime landscape into something magical and mysterious. "I've been thinking about what you said about quality over quantity," Alina reflected. "I realize I've been measuring myself against a standard that doesn't actually align with what brings me joy. My contentment with solitude and few deep connections isn't a flaw to fix, but perhaps a wisdom to honor." Kobo smiled, pleased with her insight. The Buddha taught that true happiness comes not from getting what we want, but from wanting what we already have. Your 2 authentic friendships, combined with your rich inner life, provide exactly the nourishment your particular spirit needs. Remember always that your sensitivity, which makes large social gatherings draining rather than energizing, is actually a gift. It allows you to perceive nuances others miss, to create art that speaks to the heart, and to offer the rare gift of true presence to those fortunate enough to be counted among your friends. As Alina prepared to depart the next morning, Kobo offered one final teaching. The Buddha said, "Happiness is not having much but giving with a full heart." Perhaps the measure of friendship is not how many people you know, but how fully you give yourself to those connections that genuinely matter. In the years that followed, Alina remained content with her small circle of deep friendships. She no longer compared herself to those with larger social networks, recognizing that different souls require different forms of nourishment. She discovered that her capacity for solitude and depth made her a particularly valuable friend to those few who shared her values. Occasionally, she returned to the mountain hermitage, sometimes bringing Mei or Jiro along to experience its peaceful atmosphere. During one such visit, she shared with Kobo how his teachings had transformed not just her understanding of friendship, but her relationship with herself. "I no longer see my preference for depth over breadth as something to overcome," she told him. "Instead, I recognize it as a natural expression of my particular spirit. This acceptance has brought a peace I never found when trying to be someone I'm not." The Buddha would approve, Kobo smiled. He taught that self-understanding is the beginning of all wisdom. By honoring your nature rather than fighting against it, you embody his teaching that peace comes from within. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you too can reflect on the quality of your connections rather than their quantity. Consider which relationships in your life offer genuine nourishment for your spirit. Where do you feel truly seen, accepted, and encouraged to grow. Remember the Buddha's wisdom that a true friend is one who stands by you in your hour of need. By this measure, even one authentic connection may provide more sustenance than countless surface-level acquaintances. And if you find joy in solitude, or prefer a small circle of deep friendships, know that this preference isn't a flaw, but possibly a wisdom, one shared by many profound thinkers throughout history. May your sleep be peaceful tonight. May you awaken with renewed appreciation for the true connections in your life, whether many or few. And may you find contentment in being exactly the type of friend your unique spirit is designed to be. The power of forgiveness, healing through letting go. Tonight, as the world grows quieter around us, we journey to a marketplace in ancient India where a powerful lesson in forgiveness awaits. Allow your body to become even heavier, your breath deeper and more rhythmic. As we explore the transformative power of letting go, feel yourself releasing any tension you've been carrying. The Buddha taught, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This profound wisdom reveals a truth many of us discover the hard way, that resentment hurts us far more than the person we're angry with. Tonight's story explores how forgiveness liberates not only the forgiven, but, more importantly, the one who forgives. In a vibrant marketplace on the outskirts of Rajagaha, one of the largest cities of ancient India, a crowd had gathered to hear the Buddha speak. People from all walks of life, merchants and farmers, nobles and servants, the wealthy and the struggling, stood together, drawn by the teacher's reputation for profound yet practical wisdom. The Buddha sat serenely beneath the shade of a large banyan tree, his presence radiating a remarkable quality of peace that seemed to create a pocket of stillness in the otherwise bustling marketplace. Those who had gathered closest listened intently as he spoke about finding contentment amid life's inevitable challenges. Among those on the periphery of the crowd stood a merchant named Devadatta, whose face was tight with anger. Unlike the others who had come seeking wisdom, Devadatta had arrived with a very different purpose. For years, he had watched as the Buddha's teachings gained popularity, drawing followers away from traditional beliefs that had financially benefited merchants like himself, who sold ritual items and sacrificial offerings. Devadatta had once been respected as a religious authority in his own right, selling not just goods but also interpretations of sacred texts that assured the wealthy their prosperity was evidence of divine favor. The Buddha's emphasis on ethical conduct over ritual, and his teaching that inner peace could be attained without expensive offerings, directly threatened Devadatta's livelihood and status. As the Buddha's teaching continued, Devadatta pushed his way through the crowd, his anger building with each step. In his mind, this wandering teacher had stolen everything from him: respect, livelihood, purpose. Years of resentment had hardened into hatred that now demanded expression. When he reached the inner circle of listeners, Devadatta stood directly before the Buddha, his body trembling with rage. Without warning, he spat directly in the Buddha's face, a shocking act of disrespect that caused the crowd to gasp and step back. Several of the Buddha's disciples moved to intervene, their faces showing anger at this treatment of their beloved teacher. But the Buddha raised his hand slightly, signaling them to remain calm. The entire marketplace seemed to freeze in that moment, everyone waiting to see how the renowned teacher would respond to such a deliberate insult. The Buddha remained perfectly still. He showed no anger, no offense, no desire to retaliate. With the same hand he had used to signal his disciples, he calmly wiped his face. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he looked at Devadatta with an expression of genuine compassion. "Thank you," the Buddha said softly. These simple words, spoken without a trace of sarcasm or resentment, completely confounded Devadatta. He had expected, perhaps even wanted, anger, retaliation, or public humiliation. This calm acceptance was so unexpected that it momentarily shattered his rage, replacing it with confusion. "Thank me?" he sputtered. "I just spat in your face. Are you so disconnected from normal human feelings that you would thank someone for insulting you?" The Buddha's gentle smile didn't waver. "When someone offers a gift that is declined," he explained, "to whom does the gift belong?" The merchant frowned, puzzled by this seemingly irrelevant question. "To the giver, of course," he answered. "Yes," the Buddha nodded. "You have offered me your anger, wrapped in the gesture of spitting. I decline to receive this gift. It remains yours. But I thank you for the opportunity to practice patience and compassion, which are gifts I gladly accept." Devadatta stood speechless, his carefully constructed narrative of victimhood suddenly without foundation. He had expected the satisfying fuel of a reciprocal anger to feed his righteous indignation. Instead, he found himself holding his own undiminished rage, made more uncomfortable by the contrast with the Buddha's evident peace. The crowd remained silent, witnessing this unexpected exchange. Many had experienced Devadatta's sharp business practices or dismissive attitude toward those he considered beneath him. Some felt a quiet satisfaction, seeing him confronted not with matching anger, but with its opposite, a compassion that revealed the smallness of his attack. "You speak in riddles to appear wise," Devadatta finally managed, trying to recover his position. "Your teachings have taken food from my children's mouths. You deserve my contempt." The Buddha considered these words thoughtfully. "I understand your pain," he said. "When ways of living that have supported us for years are threatened, fear naturally arises. But consider this: if your livelihood depends on others remaining in ignorance or fear, perhaps it is time to discover a new path that benefits both yourself and others. There are many ways to earn a living that create value rather than exploit need. Your intelligence and knowledge of sacred texts could be directed toward teaching ethics and wisdom rather than selling false promises. This market needs honest merchants of practical goods as much as it needs teachers of truth." Something in the Buddha's words, perhaps their lack of condemnation combined with their honest assessment, penetrated Devadatta's armor of anger. For the first time, he faced the possibility that his rage might be misdirected, covering a deeper fear about his own choices. Without another word, Devadatta turned and pushed his way back through the crowd, which parted silently to let him pass. His face no longer showed anger, but confusion and, perhaps, the first glimmer of reflection. The Buddha returned to his teaching as if nothing unusual had occurred, but many in the audience found their attention divided between his words and the departing figure of Devadatta. They had witnessed something remarkable, not just an insult declined, but a demonstration of how freedom from reactivity creates space for genuine compassion. That night, Devadatta could not sleep. He paced his modest home long after his family had retired, replaying the marketplace encounter in his mind. Each time he remembered the Buddha's calm response to his provocation, he felt increasingly uncomfortable with his own behavior. The contrast between his burning anger and the Buddha's evident peace made clear which state was preferable. By morning, something had shifted within him. The anger that had defined his days for so long had begun to feel like a heavy burden he was tired of carrying. With the first light of dawn, he made a decision that surprised even himself. The Buddha and his disciples were still encamped at the edge of the city, where many would come to receive teachings over the course of their stay. When Devadatta arrived, he found the Buddha sitting beneath the same banyan tree, though the crowd today was smaller, mostly serious students, rather than curious onlookers. Approaching with none of the previous day's aggression, Devadatta stopped at a respectful distance and bowed deeply. The Buddha looked up, recognition in his eyes but no trace of yesterday's confrontation in his manner. He gestured for Devadatta to come closer. "I could not sleep," Devadatta began, his voice stripped of its earlier hostility. "Your response to my disrespect has shown me the ugliness of my own anger. I am ashamed of my behavior and ask your forgiveness." The Buddha regarded him thoughtfully. "There is nothing to forgive," he said gently. "The man who stood before me yesterday, burning with rage, is not the same man who stands before me now, seeking understanding. That man exists only in memory. Yesterday's actions arose from yesterday's understanding," the Buddha continued. "Today you have new understanding, and so new actions become possible. This is the nature of impermanence. Nothing remains fixed, including who we are and what we are capable of." Devadatta had prepared himself for a difficult conversation, perhaps involving penance or reparations. This immediate acceptance, this suggestion that forgiveness wasn't even necessary because the offense belonged to a self that no longer existed, was both confusing and liberating. "But I remember what I did," Devadatta said, "even if you choose not to hold it against me." "Yes," the Buddha acknowledged. "Memory remains, and with it, the opportunity to learn. But memory need not become a chain binding us to past identities. Each moment offers the freedom to choose again, to become someone new." The Buddha invited Devadatta to sit beside him in the shade of the banyan tree. For the next hour, they spoke not as adversaries, but as two humans exploring the nature of anger, forgiveness, and transformation. The Buddha's disciples, observing from a distance, marveled at how yesterday's antagonist had so quickly become today's earnest student. Anger arises when we believe a story about how things should be, rather than accepting how they are, the Buddha explained. You believed your livelihood and status should remain unchanged, and when my teachings threatened that expectation, anger was the natural result. But your anger did not change reality. It only added suffering to an already difficult situation. This is why I teach that forgiveness is not primarily for the benefit of others, but for ourselves. When we forgive, we put down the hot coal of anger we've been carrying. Devadatta considered this carefully. I have been angry for so long that it became part of my identity, he admitted. Without it, I'm not entirely sure who I am. The Buddha smiled with understanding. This is a common fear that keeps many bound to old patterns. But consider how a snake must release its grip on its old skin to grow. In the space between identities, between who you were and who you are becoming, true freedom can be found. As their conversation continued, others gathered to listen, drawn by the remarkable sight of yesterday's antagonist, engaged in earnest dialogue with the Buddha. Among them was a young monk named Ananda, who would later become known for his exceptional memory and his role in preserving the Buddha's teachings. Ananda was particularly struck by how the Buddha embodied the forgiveness he taught. There was no performance of magnanimity, no subtle reminders of Devadatta's transgression, just a genuine presence with the person before him as they were in this moment, not as they had been in the past. Master, Ananda asked when there was a pause in the conversation, how did you maintain such peace when Devadatta confronted you yesterday? Were you not angry at all? The Buddha considered the question thoughtfully. Anger arose as a possibility, he acknowledged, as it does for anyone when faced with hostility. But between the arising of anger and acting upon it, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom to choose a different response. Through practice, I have learned to rest in that space, rather than being carried away by the initial reaction. From that space, I could see not just Devadatta's anger, but the suffering beneath it. Seeing suffering naturally evokes compassion rather than retaliation. Devadatta listened intently to this explanation. The idea that there could be space between feeling anger and acting upon it was revolutionary to him. His entire life, he had assumed that anger demanded expression, that restraining it would only cause it to intensify. How does one create this space? He asked. My anger has always felt immediate and overwhelming, leaving no room for choice. It begins with awareness, the Buddha explained. When anger arises, simply noting anger is present creates a small separation between yourself and the emotion. You are not your anger. You are the awareness that notices anger. From this awareness, new possibilities emerge. The breath can be a helpful anchor, he continued. When you feel anger arising, bringing attention to your breathing slows the mind enough to create space for wisdom. In that space, you might ask, will expressing this anger lead to harm or healing? Does it align with who I wish to become? As the day progressed, more people gathered to listen to this unexpected teaching on forgiveness. Many had their own experiences of holding on to resentments that had hardened into bitterness over time. The sight of Devadatta's transformation from hostile opponent to engaged listener in the span of a day offered hope that such burdens could indeed be put down. Toward evening, as the gathering prepared to disperse, Devadatta addressed the Buddha one more time. I came seeking forgiveness, he said, but I'm leaving with something far more valuable, the understanding that I must forgive myself as well. My anger toward you was really anger at my own choices, projected outward. The Buddha nodded, pleased with this insight. Forgiveness is often the most difficult kind, yet without it, our forgiveness of others remains incomplete. When we truly forgive ourselves, we create space for genuine transformation. Remember, he added, forgiveness is not a single act, but a practice, something we cultivate day by day, moment by moment. There will be times when old patterns of anger arise again. When this happens, greet them with the same compassion you would offer a friend who has lost their way, and gently redirect your mind toward peace. In the months and years that followed this encounter, Devadatta underwent a profound transformation. He did not abandon his merchant business entirely, but redirected it toward goods that genuinely benefited others. He became known for fair prices and honest representations of his wares. More surprisingly to those who had known him before, he began to teach what he was learning about managing anger and practicing forgiveness. The story of his confrontation with the Buddha and the unexpected response that catalyzed his change spread throughout the region. Many who heard it found the courage to examine their own resentments and consider the possibility of letting them go, not for the benefit of those who had harmed them, but for their own liberation from suffering. Years later, when the Buddha returned to that same marketplace during his travels, Devadatta was among those who came to welcome him. The two sat once again beneath the banyan tree, no longer as former adversaries, but as fellow travelers on the path of awakening. "Do you remember our first meeting?" Devadatta asked with a smile that acknowledged how far he had come from that angry day. "I remember a man in pain," the Buddha replied simply, "and I see before me now a man at peace. Both are temporary conditions. The freedom lies in knowing that neither defines who you truly are." Ananda, who had accompanied the Buddha on this return journey, later recorded this teaching on forgiveness as one of the most powerful demonstrations of the Dharma in action. The transformation of Devadatta became a frequently cited example of how responding to hatred with compassion could create space for genuine change. As the Buddha continued his teaching that day, he offered what would become one of his most quoted insights on forgiveness. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This vivid image helped many understand that forgiveness is not a gift we give others, but a liberation we offer ourselves. He also taught that, in this world, hatred has never dispelled hatred. Only love dispels hatred. This principle, responding to negativity with its opposite, rather than with more of the same, became a cornerstone of Buddhist practice and a guidepost for those seeking to break cycles of resentment and retaliation in their own lives. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you too can reflect on the liberating power of forgiveness. Is there someone in your life, perhaps even yourself, who might benefit from the release of a grudge long carried? What burden of resentment might you put down, not for the benefit of the person who harmed you, but for your own peace? Remember the Buddha's wisdom that forgiveness is not about condoning harmful actions or forgetting important lessons. Rather, it's about freeing yourself from the ongoing pain of carrying yesterday's injuries into today's experience. It's about creating space between what happened and who you are now becoming. The Buddha taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. This includes the gift of forgiveness, the setting down of burdens too heavy to carry into the future you wish to create. The dark side of kindness, finding balance in giving. As night deepens around us, we travel to a mountainside monastery nestled among ancient trees, where an unexpected lesson about kindness awaits. Let your body sink more deeply into comfort as we explore this paradoxical wisdom. With each breath, feel yourself growing heavier, your mind growing quieter. We often hear that kindness is always good, that we should give endlessly of ourselves to others. But tonight's story reveals something rarely discussed, the shadow side of kindness, when giving too much depletes our spirit and diminishes our ability to truly help others. This ancient wisdom remains profoundly relevant in our modern world, where many of us struggle with boundaries and self-care. The Buddha taught, you can search throughout the entire universe for someone who is more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. This teaching reminds us that caring for ourselves is not selfish, but necessary for sustainable compassion toward others. High on a forested mountain, surrounded by cherry trees and gentle flowing streams, stood a temple known for its teachings on balanced living. Here lived the elderly monk Arrow, whose practical wisdom about navigating life's complexities drew seekers from many provinces. One spring morning, as cherry blossoms drifted like pink snow around the temple grounds, a young woman named Kiara arrived. Her face, though beautiful, carried shadows of exhaustion and disappointment. She had traveled for 5 days from her village, seeking wisdom about a persistent problem that left her feeling increasingly empty. After being welcomed and offered tea to refresh herself after her journey, Kiara was invited to speak with Master Arrow in the temple garden. The old monk's kind yet penetrating gaze seemed to see beyond her careful composure to the depletion beneath. Master Arrow, Kiara began, her voice soft yet determined. I've come because something in my life feels deeply wrong, though I can't understand what it is. I've always been kind and generous, the person everyone in my village comes to for help, for listening, for support. I give everything I can to others, yet I feel increasingly hollow, as if something essential is being drained from me. She paused, struggling to articulate her confusion. I was taught that kindness brings joy to the giver as well as the receiver. If that's true, why do I feel so depleted? Have I not been kind enough? Or is there something wrong with how I'm practicing kindness? Arrow studied her thoughtfully, noting the tension in her shoulders and the way her hands clutched her teacup, as if seeking warmth from its simple clay form. He recognized in her the common pattern of someone who had given far beyond their capacity, mistaking depletion for virtue. Kiara, he said gently, before I answer, may I ask you a question? When was the last time you did something solely for your own joy, with no thought of helping others? The young woman looked startled, almost guilty, as if he had suggested something improper. She thought for a long moment. I can't remember, she finally admitted. There's always someone who needs help in the village. It would feel selfish to pursue my own interests when others are suffering. Arrow nodded, his suspicion confirmed. Let me share a story that has been passed down through generations, he said, gesturing for her to follow him deeper into the garden. They walked together along a stone path that wound between flowering cherry trees and carefully tended vegetable plots. Imagine a village surrounded by a lush forest, Arrow began. At the center of this village stood a magnificent cherry tree, more ancient and glorious than any other. Its roots reached deep into the earth, and its branches extended shelter and beauty to all who gathered beneath them. This tree was considered sacred by the villagers. Not only did it provide beauty and shade, but its fruits were exceptionally sweet and nourishing. The villagers believed that the prosperity of their community was directly connected to the health of this great tree. They stopped beside a stone bench, overlooking a small pond where koi fish swam in lazy circles, their orange and white forms creating living patterns in the clear water. Arrow invited Kiara to sit, then continued his story. For generations, the village operated by a principle of balance. They took only what they needed from the tree and the surrounding forest, always giving back through care and cultivation. Each family was responsible for tending the tree for 1 month of the year, ensuring it received proper water, clearing away pests, and treating any signs of disease. This system worked beautifully for many years. The tree flourished, and so did the village. But gradually, things began to change. As the village prospered, some families became more concerned with accumulating wealth than maintaining balance. They took more than their share of fruits, without contributing equally to the tree's care. Other families, seeing this imbalance, tried to compensate by giving even more of their time and energy to the tree's care. Someone must maintain the balance, they reasoned. If others will not do their part, we must do more. At first, this seemed admirable. But over time, these overly generous families began to suffer. Their own gardens were neglected as they spent all their energy on the communal tree. Their children received less attention. Their homes fell into disrepair. In trying to maintain the balance for the entire village, they created a profound imbalance in their own lives. Kiara nodded slowly, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. The parallels to her own situation were becoming clear. Meanwhile, Arrow continued, something unexpected was happening to the tree itself. Despite receiving care from the overly generous families, it began to weaken. Its fruits became less sweet, its leaves less vibrant. The village elders couldn't understand what was happening until a wise woman who lived at the forest's edge offered an insight. "The tree is suffering," she explained, "because the care it receives is out of balance. Some give nothing, creating emptiness. Others give too much, creating dependency. The tree needs balanced, sustainable care from all who benefit from its gifts, not excessive sacrifice from a few." Arrow paused, allowing Kiara time to absorb the metaphor. A gentle breeze stirred the cherry blossoms around them, a few petals landing on the surface of the pond, where they floated like tiny boats among the fish. "The moral of this story," Arrow said softly, "is that generosity must be balanced to be truly beneficial, both for the receiver and the giver. When we give without discernment or boundaries, we not only deplete ourselves, but often create unhealthy dynamics with those around us. You might think that kindness is always good since it helps maintain well-being," he continued. "However, there is what we might call toxic kindness, a form of giving where we forget ourselves entirely, becoming so focused on others' needs that we disappear into the background of our own lives." Kiara's eyes widened at this concept. No one had ever suggested to her that kindness could have a dark side. In her village, self-sacrifice was consistently praised, especially for women. The more one gave, the more virtuous they were considered. Think of a parent, Arrow suggested, who gives everything for their children's well-being to the point of completely neglecting their own health, interests, and dreams. What message does this send to the children? And what happens when that parent inevitably burns out from such unsustainable giving? The children learn that self-neglect is virtuous, Chiara replied thoughtfully. And when the parent burns out, the very people they were trying to help suffer even more from their collapse. Precisely, Arrow nodded. The Buddha taught the middle path, avoiding extremes in all aspects of life. This applies to giving as much as to anything else. Sustainable compassion requires that we honor our own needs alongside those of others. They sat in silence for a moment, watching a dragonfly skim across the pond's surface. Chiara seemed to be processing this new perspective, examining her life through a different lens. There are several ways that excessive kindness becomes harmful, Arrow continued. First, when we never say no to others' requests, we eventually become resentful, even if we hide it from ourselves. This resentment poisons the very kindness we're trying to offer. Second, when we constantly prioritize others' needs above our own, we teach them that our boundaries don't matter. People come to expect our sacrifice rather than appreciating it as a gift freely given. Third, and perhaps most importantly, excessive self-sacrifice often comes from a place of fear rather than love, fear of rejection, fear of not being needed, fear of confrontation. Actions motivated by fear rather than love rarely bring the results we hope for. Chiara looked down at her hands, which had finally relaxed their grip on the teacup. I recognize myself in what you're saying, she admitted. I've been afraid that if I stopped being constantly available to everyone, they would no longer value me. My kindness has been partly about earning my place in the community. Arrow nodded, with compassion. The Buddha taught that there are 4 sublime states of mind: loving, kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Note that equanimity, a balanced, peaceful mind, is essential alongside compassion. Without it, our compassion becomes distorted and unsustainable. He rose from the bench and gestured for Chiara to continue walking with him through the garden. They followed the path to a section where medicinal herbs grew in carefully tended beds. Look at how these healing plants are cultivated, Arrow said. They need adequate space around them. If planted too closely together, they compete for nutrients and none thrive. So too, with humans, we need space for our own growth if we are to have anything meaningful to offer others. As they continued their walk, Arrow shared more aspects of balanced giving. He explained how helping others navigate their challenges requires discernment about when assistance supports growth and when it creates dependency. He described the importance of recognizing one's own capacity on any given day, rather than giving from a place of depletion. The Buddha taught that we should be islands unto ourselves, Arrow explained. This doesn't mean isolation, but rather developing inner resources so that our well-being isn't entirely dependent on external validation or roles. From this stable inner island, we can reach out to others in genuine service rather than from need. By midday, they had completed a circuit of the temple grounds and returned to a small pavilion where a simple lunch awaited them. As they ate rice, vegetables, and pickled radishes, Kiara asked the question that had been forming in her mind throughout their conversation. Master Arrow, how do I find the right balance? How do I continue to be kind without losing myself in the process? Arrow smiled, pleased with her willingness to explore this nuanced territory. The Buddha offered guidance through what he called the middle way, finding the path between harmful extremes. Let me share some practical approaches to balanced kindness. First, establish clear boundaries. Decide what you can genuinely offer without resentment, and practice communicating these limits clearly and kindly. For example, you might say, I can listen to you for half an hour this afternoon, and then I need to attend to my own work. Second, release the guilt that often accompanies self-care. Remember that taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary for sustainable compassion. The Buddha himself took time for rest and solitude, even stepping away from his disciples regularly to replenish his energy. Third, pay attention to motivation. Ask yourself honestly, am I helping because it truly serves this person's highest good, or am I seeking approval, avoiding conflict, or fulfilling an identity as the helpful one? Genuine compassion comes from a clear heart, not from hidden needs. Kiara nodded, absorbing these teachings. She could see how her helping often came from a place of seeking validation rather than from centered compassion. The distinction was subtle but profound. Fourth, Arrow continued, cultivate discernment about when help is truly helpful. Sometimes allowing others to struggle through their challenges builds their capacity more than rescuing them. Ask, am I supporting growth or fostering dependency before jumping in to solve problems for others? Finally, create a list of priorities that includes your own well-being and growth. The Buddha taught that we have duties to ourselves as well as to others. These include developing wisdom, ethical conduct, and inner peace, none of which can be achieved if we're constantly depleted from excessive giving. After lunch, they moved to a quiet meditation hall where afternoon sunlight filtered through paper windows, creating a golden atmosphere conducive to reflection. Here, Arrow guided Kiara through a meditation practice specifically designed to cultivate balanced compassion. Begin by extending kindness to yourself, he instructed. Imagine filling your own cup first, until it naturally overflows to others. This isn't selfish, it's the only sustainable approach to genuine compassion. The meditation began with self-compassion, then gradually expanded to include loved ones, neutral persons, difficult people, and finally all beings. Throughout, Arrow emphasized maintaining equanimity, a balanced heart that offers love without becoming overwhelmed by others' suffering. The Buddha taught that true compassion includes wisdom, Arrow explained after the meditation concluded. It recognizes that each person must walk their own path and learn their own lessons. Our role isn't to take on others' journeys, but to offer support while honoring their autonomy and our own boundaries. As evening approached, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Kiara prepared for her final night at the temple before beginning her journey home the next day. She felt both challenged and liberated by the day's teachings, recognizing for the first time how her pattern of excessive giving had undermined the very joy and connection she sought to create. "One last guidance before you depart tomorrow," Arrow offered, as they watched the sunset from the temple porch. "Remember that changing patterns of excessive giving often meets resistance from those who have come to expect your sacrifice. Some may try to make you feel selfish for establishing healthy boundaries. When this happens," he continued, "recall the tree in our story. By reclaiming balance in your life, you're not becoming less compassionate, you're creating the conditions for genuine, sustainable kindness that truly benefits everyone, including yourself." That evening, in the quiet of her guest room, Kiara reflected on specific changes she would implement upon returning to her village. She would set aside time each day for her own interests, the poetry she had neglected for years, the walks in nature that replenished her spirit. She would practice saying no to requests that exceeded her capacity, offering alternatives rather than automatic self-sacrifice. Most importantly, she would work on releasing the belief that her value depended on how much she gave to others. The Buddha's teaching that each being has inherent worth, not earned through service but intrinsic to existence itself, offered a profound alternative to her lifelong pattern of seeking validation through endless giving. In the months and years that followed her visit to the temple, Kiara gradually transformed her relationship with kindness. Rather than being the person who always said yes, she became known for her thoughtful discernment about where her energy could be most helpful. She learned to give from a place of genuine choice rather than compulsion or fear. Surprisingly to her, the quality of her relationships improved. Those who valued her only for what she could give them naturally drifted away, while deeper connections formed with people who appreciated her authentic presence. The help she did offer became more effective because it came from a place of fullness rather than depletion. Occasionally, Kiara returned to the mountain temple to deepen her understanding with Master Arrow. During one such visit, she shared how the teaching about balanced kindness had transformed not just her relationships with others, but also her relationship with herself. "I've discovered something unexpected," she told Arrow as they walked the same garden path where their first conversation had taken place. "When I give with healthy boundaries and from genuine choice rather than obligation, the giving itself brings me joy. It's entirely different from the depleted feeling I used to mistake for virtue." Arrow smiled, pleased with her discovery. The Buddha taught that actions undertaken with a clear and balanced mind bring happiness to both giver and receiver. What you're experiencing is the natural joy of genuine compassion, very different from the hollow exhaustion of compulsive helping. "I understand now," Kiara said, "that true kindness includes kindness to oneself. It's not a matter of choosing between my needs and others' needs, but of finding the wisdom to honor both." "Exactly so," Arrow nodded. The Buddha expressed this beautifully when he said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." This teaching reminds us that including ourselves in the circle of compassion isn't selfish, it's necessary for the circle to be complete. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you too can reflect on the balance of giving and receiving in your own life. Are there places where you consistently override your own needs to care for others? What would a more sustainable approach to compassion look like in your daily relationships? Remember the Buddha's teaching about the middle way, finding balance between extremes. Neither complete self-sacrifice nor self-centered indifference brings lasting happiness. True joy comes from honoring both self and other in a dance of balanced, authentic kindness. The art of forgiveness, finding freedom through letting go. As our journey through ancient wisdom nears its completion, we arrive at a small temple nestled beside a mountain lake, where fireflies dance over still waters, and the air carries the scent of pine and distant rain. Allow yourself to settle even more deeply into comfort as we explore our final teaching. With each breath, feel your body becoming heavier, your mind growing more peaceful. Tonight's story explores one of the most challenging yet liberating practices in Buddhist tradition: forgiveness. Not the kind of forgiveness that excuses harmful actions or pretends wounds don't exist, but a deeper forgiveness that frees us from the prison of resentment and allows healing to begin. The Buddha taught, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This profound insight reveals that forgiveness is not primarily a gift we offer others, but a liberation we grant ourselves. In a tranquil valley where mist gathered each morning among ancient cedars, there stood a modest temple known for its teachings on inner peace and reconciliation. Here lived the respected master Kumin, whose gentle approach to life's deepest wounds drew people from many provinces, each carrying burdens of hurt that had hardened into resentment over time. On a summer evening when the air was sweet with the scent of night-blooming jasmine, a middle-aged man named Takeo arrived at the temple gate. Unlike many who came with clear questions or specific problems, Takeo's face revealed only a general weariness, the kind that comes not from physical exertion but from carrying invisible weights for many years. After being welcomed and offered a simple meal, Takeo sat with Master Kumin in the temple's meditation garden, where the sound of a small waterfall created a soothing backdrop for conversation. Fireflies had begun to appear as dusk deepened, their gentle lights blinking like stars come down to earth. "What brings you to our temple?" Kumin asked, his voice matching the gentleness of their surroundings. Takeo sighed, struggling to articulate what had compelled his journey. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "I've achieved success in my work as a merchant. My children are grown and doing well. I have no specific complaint I can name, yet I feel burdened, as if I'm carrying a weight that keeps me from experiencing the joy my life should hold." Kumin nodded, recognizing in Takeo's words a common condition, one he had seen in many who came to the temple. "Often, the heaviest burdens we carry are invisible," he said. "Tell me, are there people in your life you've been unable to forgive?" The question seemed to catch Takeo by surprise. He had expected inquiries about his spiritual practices, or perhaps suggestions for meditation techniques. This direct reference to forgiveness touched something deep, a tender spot he usually avoided. "There are some," he acknowledged after a pause, his voice growing quieter. "My former business partner who cheated me 20 years ago. A childhood friend who betrayed a confidence and turned others against me. My father, who was often harsh and never gave the approval I sought. He stopped, seeming surprised by how readily these old wounds had surfaced. "And yourself?" Kumin asked gently. "Have you forgiven yourself for your own mistakes and limitations?" Takeo looked startled, as if this possibility had never occurred to him. I'm not sure," he stammered. "I've always believed in holding myself to high standards." Kumin smiled with compassion. "Perhaps tonight I could share a story about forgiveness, one that has helped many understand its deeper nature. Would that be welcome?" Takeo nodded, settling more comfortably on his cushion as night deepened around them. The temple attendants lit paper lanterns along the garden paths, creating pools of warm light in the gathering darkness. "This story," Kumin began, "has been passed down through generations of Buddhist teachers. It concerns an encounter between the Buddha and a man whose heart was consumed by bitterness. Many centuries ago, in the time when the Buddha walked the dusty roads of northern India, his reputation for wisdom and compassion had spread throughout the region. People from all walks of life, from kings to beggars, sought his guidance on matters both practical and profound. One day, as the Buddha sat teaching beneath a banyan tree in a busy marketplace, a merchant approached with anger evident in every line of his body. This man had heard the Buddha's teachings about forgiveness and compassion and found them not just disagreeable but personally offensive. You see, the merchant had been deeply wronged earlier in his life. His business partner had stolen from him, taking not just material wealth, but also damaging his reputation with false accusations. The injustice had festered in his heart for decades, becoming the center around which his identity had formed. The very idea that he should forgive this wrong seemed to invalidate his suffering and excuse the harm done to him. With each step toward the Buddha, his anger grew, fueled by years of rehearsing his grievances and imagining revenge he had never been able to enact. Takeo shifted uncomfortably on his cushion, perhaps recognizing something of himself in this description. The weight he had spoken of seemed more tangible now, as if being named had given it substance. The merchant stood before the Buddha, Kumin continued, and without preamble, spat directly in his face, an act of profound disrespect intended to provoke a reaction that would reveal the teacher's serene composure as merely a performance. The crowd gasped, many moving to intervene. But the Buddha remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged except for a slight softening around his eyes, as he regarded the merchant with what could only be described as compassion. With the same hand that had moments before been gesturing to illustrate a teaching point, he calmly wiped his face. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he looked at the merchant and said simply, "Thank you." The merchant was confounded. "Thank you," he sputtered. "I just spat in your face. Are you mad?" The Buddha's reply came with the same tranquility that had characterized his response to the insult. "You have given me the opportunity to practice patience," he said, "and you have revealed something important." "What could I possibly have revealed except my contempt for you?" the merchant demanded. "You have revealed the prison you live in," the Buddha said gently. "For a man whose heart is free does not need to spit in another's face." Kumin paused here, allowing the image to resonate in the quiet garden. The only sounds were the continuing murmur of the waterfall and the distant call of a night bird. The merchant left in confusion that day, he continued after a moment. But the Buddha's response, or more accurately, his lack of an expected response, created a crack in the fortress of resentment he had built around his heart. For the first time in decades, he began to consider the possibility that his anger, which he had nursed as a righteous response to injustice, might actually be the source of his suffering rather than its result. That night, the merchant could not sleep. He tossed and turned, replaying the marketplace encounter in his mind. Each time he remembered the Buddha's calm face after such a deliberate insult, something shifted in his understanding. By morning, though he could not have articulated why, he felt compelled to return to the teacher he had tried to humiliate. When he arrived at the place where the Buddha and his disciples had made their temporary camp, he approached with a very different demeanor. Bowing deeply, he said, "I have come to ask your forgiveness for my behavior yesterday. I don't understand why, but I could not rest until I had done so." The Buddha looked at him with the same gentle attention he had offered the day before. "There is nothing to forgive," he said, surprising the merchant once again. "The man who stood before me yesterday, burning with rage, is not the same man who stands before me now, seeking understanding. That man exists only in memory." "But I remember what I did," the merchant protested. "The shame of it kept me awake all night." "Yes," the Buddha acknowledged, "memory remains, and with it the opportunity to learn. But you are not bound to continue being the person who acted from such suffering. Each moment offers the freedom to choose again, to become someone new." Takeo's posture had changed as he listened to the story. The tension in his shoulders had visibly released, and his breath had deepened, as if some constriction were beginning to loosen. The Buddha invited the merchant to sit with him, Kumin continued. For the next hour, they spoke not as adversaries, but as two humans exploring the nature of anger, forgiveness, and transformation. The Buddha explained that the practice of forgiveness is not about excusing harmful actions or forgetting important lessons, but about freeing oneself from the ongoing pain of carrying yesterday's injuries into today's experience. "Imagine," the Buddha said to the merchant, "that someone shot you with an arrow. Would you leave the arrow in your flesh, allowing it to continue causing pain long after the archer had gone? Of course not, you would remove it immediately. Yet when someone harms us with words or actions, we often leave the arrow of resentment embedded in our hearts for years, decades, even lifetimes. But removing the arrow doesn't mean the person who shot it shouldn't face consequences," the merchant argued. "Justice still matters." Indeed, the Buddha agreed. Forgiveness doesn't mean we abandon discernment or appropriate action. We can still establish boundaries, seek restoration, or even pursue justice through proper channels. But we do so from a mind unclouded by hatred, which is more likely to result in genuine resolution rather than escalating cycles of harm. The fireflies had grown more numerous now, their intermittent lights creating a magical atmosphere in the temple garden. Takeo watched their dancing patterns as he absorbed the story, his face reflecting deep reflection. "What happened to the merchant?" he asked after a while. Kumin smiled. "The merchant became one of the Buddha's most dedicated students. Having experienced the weight of carrying resentment and the freedom of letting it go, he was uniquely positioned to help others find the same liberation. The very experience that had been his prison became, through forgiveness, his path to freedom. But, Takeo objected, surely it can't be that simple. Some wounds are too deep, some injustices too severe to simply let go. You're right that it's not simple, Kumin acknowledged. Forgiveness is rarely a single act, but rather a process, sometimes a lengthy one. The Buddha never suggested that we deny our pain or prematurely declare ourselves over it. What he offered was a practice, a way of gradually releasing our grip on resentment. Would you like to learn this practice? Kumin asked. Takeo nodded, his earlier weariness now replaced by a cautious hope. The practice begins with honesty, Kumin explained. We must first acknowledge the full extent of our hurt without minimizing it. This honors our experience and creates a foundation for genuine rather than superficial forgiveness. Next, we recognize that holding on to resentment isn't protecting us from further harm, but actually prolonging our suffering. As the Buddha taught, it's like continuing to drink poison and expecting the other person to die. Then we distinguish between the action and the person. All harmful actions arise from ignorance, fear, or pain, even those that seem deliberately cruel. This doesn't excuse the behavior, but helps us see the universal human condition behind it. Finally, we make a conscious choice to release our grip on resentment, not for the other person's benefit, but for our own liberation. We might use a visualization of setting down a heavy burden or opening our clenched fist to let something go. Takeo considered these steps thoughtfully. What about forgiving oneself? He asked. You mentioned that earlier, and I realize I may be harsher with my own failings than with others. Self-forgiveness follows the same principles but often proves the most challenging practice, Kumin replied. We must extend to ourselves the same compassion we would offer a dear friend who had made a mistake. The Buddha taught that all beings deserve compassion, and that includes the person in the mirror. As the night deepened around them, Kumin guided Takeo through a forgiveness meditation, first focusing on someone who had caused minor harm, then gradually working toward more significant wounds, including those he had inflicted on himself. The practice didn't aim for immediate transformation, but planted seeds that would continue to grow long after Takeo returned home. Remember, Kumin advised as they concluded their evening together, forgiveness doesn't happen all at once. It's more like watching a tightly closed flower gradually open its petals to the sun. Each small release creates space for more opening, until eventually what seemed impossible becomes your natural way of being. Takeo spent 3 days at the temple, learning more about the practice of forgiveness and beginning to apply it to the specific relationships that had been sources of his invisible burden. On his final evening, he joined Kumin for tea in the same garden where they had first spoken. I feel lighter, Takeo observed, somewhat surprised by his own experience. Not completely unburdened, these patterns of resentment have deep roots, but I can sense the possibility of freedom in a way I couldn't before. That glimpse of possibility is the beginning of transformation, Kumin affirmed. The Buddha said, if it were not possible to cultivate the good, I would not tell you to do so. This applies to forgiveness as well. If liberation from resentment were not possible, the Buddha would not have taught it as a central practice. What happens when we've done this work of forgiveness, but the other person doesn't acknowledge the harm they caused? Takeo asked. My former business partner, for instance, has never admitted his dishonesty. That's an important question. Kumin nodded. Reconciliation, the restoration of relationship, requires both parties to participate. Forgiveness, however, is something you can practice regardless of the other person's awareness or response. It's primarily about your liberation, not their absolution. The Buddha distinguished between forgiveness and foolishness. Forgiving someone doesn't mean trusting them again if they've shown themselves to be untrustworthy. It doesn't mean resuming a relationship that was harmful. It simply means releasing the burning coal of resentment so your own hand can heal. As the moon rose over the temple garden, casting silver light on the small waterfall and the now still surface of the pond, Takeo felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The prospect of returning to his busy life no longer seemed like a return to burden, but an opportunity to practice this new understanding in daily interactions. One final teaching before you depart tomorrow, Kumin offered. The Buddha said, in the end, only 3 things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. Forgiveness is the art of letting go with grace, releasing not just others from the prison of your judgment, but yourself from the prison of your resentment. In the months and years that followed his visit to the temple, Takeo gradually transformed his relationship with the past hurts that had become defining features of his internal landscape. The practice wasn't always easy. There were days when old resentments flared up strongly, especially when triggered by new situations that echoed past wounds. But each time this happened, he would return to the practice Kumin had taught him, acknowledging the pain honestly, recognizing that holding onto it only prolonged his suffering, seeing the universal human condition behind harmful actions, and consciously choosing release rather than retention. With each repetition, the process became more natural, requiring less deliberate effort. Most surprisingly to Takeo, the practice of forgiveness began to change not just his relationship with the past, but his experience of the present. He found himself less easily offended, more readily assuming good intentions behind others' actions, and more capable of addressing conflicts directly before they hardened into resentments. His capacity for joy expanded as the energy previously consumed by maintaining grudges became available for appreciation and creativity. The success he had achieved in his merchant business, which once felt hollow despite its material rewards, now brought genuine satisfaction as he focused on how it allowed him to contribute to his community. Occasionally, Takeo returned to the temple to deepen his practice with Master Kumin. During one such visit, he shared a significant development. He had finally had a conversation with his former business partner, not seeking admission of wrongdoing or even apology, but simply to close that chapter with clarity and peace. The meeting wasn't what I expected, Takeo told Kumin as they walked the same garden path where their first conversation had taken place. He still denies any deliberate deception, seeing the situation entirely differently than I do. In the past, this would have reignited all my resentment. But this time, I could see his perspective, not agree with it, but understand how he might genuinely believe his version of events. That's the deeper forgiveness. Kumin nodded approvingly. Not just letting go of anger, but developing the wisdom to see how differently we all experience the same situations. The Buddha taught that we don't see things as they are, but as we are, through the filters of our own past experiences, fears, and desires. The meeting brought closure in a way I hadn't expected, Takeo continued. Not through vindication or apology, but through releasing my need for either. I realized I don't need him to see what happened through my eyes to be at peace with it myself. You've discovered the true freedom of forgiveness, Kumin smiled. As the Buddha taught, hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This love isn't sentimental or naive. It's the profound recognition of our shared humanity, with all its blindnesses and capabilities for both harm and healing. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you too can reflect on the liberating power of forgiveness. Are there resentments you've been carrying, perhaps for so long they've become part of your identity? What would it feel like to begin releasing your grip on these old injuries, not for the benefit of those who caused them, but for your own freedom and peace? Remember that forgiveness doesn't mean excusing harmful actions or pretending wounds don't exist. It doesn't mean resuming relationships that were harmful or trusting those who have shown themselves to be untrustworthy. It simply means putting down the burning coal of resentment so your own hand can heal. The Buddha taught, let go of anger, let go of pride. When you are bound by nothing, you go beyond sorrow. This ancient wisdom offers a path to freedom that begins with a single choice, the choice to open your clenched fist and release what no longer serves your happiness. As our journey through these ancient teachings comes to a close, let the wisdom of these Zen stories settle gently into your mind. Like seeds planted in fertile soil, they will continue to grow even as you sleep. We've explored how people enter our lives with purpose, not by chance, each connection offering unique lessons for our growth. We've discovered the wisdom of non-interference, learning when helping others might actually hinder their important life lessons. We've gained insight into recognizing those who may harm us, while maintaining compassion rather than judgment. We've found peace in having fewer, deeper connections rather than many shallow ones. We've learned that true kindness includes kindness to ourselves, maintaining balance in how we give. And finally, we've embraced the liberating power of forgiveness, releasing resentments that no longer serve us. The Buddha taught that peace comes from within, do not seek it without. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, allow these timeless teachings to create that peace within you. Trust that the connections in your life, whether they bring joy or challenge, are not random, but meaningful threads in the beautiful tapestry of your journey. May your sleep be peaceful and deep. May the wisdom of these stories continue to unfold in your dreams. And may you awaken renewed, a little lighter, a little wiser, ready to see with fresh eyes the sacred purpose behind each encounter in your life.